another week of Kids Church at home. I'm so glad that you are joining in this video this week as we are entering into the season of Lent. Lent is the 40 days that lead us through to Easter, and it's 40 days of reflection and thinking about the habits that we have in our own lives that maybe we can change and make better. And so we enter into that this week with a story about Jesus going into the wilderness to really think about what it is that he wants to follow. But before we jump into our story, our special shout out this week goes to Victoria and to Maya and to Sierra. Thank you so much for following along and for participating in the ways that you can. And I hope that you enjoy this story and this craft this week. So our story this week comes from the book of Mark, and it's a parable. Now, a parable is a story that somebody tells that sounds as though it could be a real story, but in fact, the truth of the story is not in the details, it's in the lesson. And in a parable, the characters in the story learn a lesson that the storyteller really wants the listener to learn. Now, Jesus was really well known for teaching with parables, but this story is different because it's a parable about Jesus. And I want you to listen carefully to this story and see if you can find the 3 lessons that Jesus learns in the story that really we are meant to learn. So the story goes something like this. After Jesus was baptized in the River Jordan, he went into the wilderness to spend time listening for God. And in the wilderness, he got very lonely and very hungry. And one day he was visited by the devil, who came to Jesus and said, "If you're so hungry and you're God's son, then you can take this rock and turn it into bread." Jesus says, no, because God teaches us that we can't live on bread alone. Well, the devil scratches his head and goes, "Fine, that's fine." And then he takes Jesus to the top of a tower and says, "Jesus, if you are so special and you're God's son, I will give you power over all of these people and all of this stuff in everything that you can see from the top of this tower." And Jesus says, "No, because God teaches me that I am supposed to love God and not power." Well, the devil feels that he's kind of losing the game now. He's got one more trick up his sleeve, and he brings Jesus to the top of a temple and says, "Jesus, you can jump off of this temple and God will save you. Go on, have some fun, jump off and watch God save you." Jesus says, "No," a 3rd time. "No," he says, "because I'm not supposed to test God. I'm supposed to just have faith." So that was fairly easy to hear where the 3 lessons were, but I wonder what those 3 lessons mean. I wonder about the first one, that we can't live on bread alone. What do you need to live on? I imagine we need to live on food is important, and water is important, and shelter. But I think even more importantly than those are our relationships and our connections with people. So I can see how that's an important lesson, that to survive the desert is not going to take just getting some bread out of the rocks. To survive the desert means having a relationship. And if you're alone in the desert, then that relationship with God is even more important. How about that second temptation? Jesus says, no, I'm supposed to love God, not power. I wonder, what would that mean in your life? Have you ever been tempted to go and play a game with some friends that you know kind of might hurt some other people, but you so want to play with your friends and be accepted by your friends that you maybe consider playing that game and hurting that other person? Well, that's power. That's the temptation that Jesus has to turn away and says, no, it's more important for me to care for and love everybody than it is for me to be popular and powerful and greedy. That's sometimes really hard to learn. I think that's a temptation we all have every once in a while, to think about ourselves and what would make us feel good and powerful instead of thinking about how we can be good friends to other people. And that third lesson, to fly off the temple and wait for God to save Jesus. Well, I wonder if sometimes people are in difficult situations and they sit in that difficult situation and they wait for God to solve the problem. And Jesus is saying, no, God can only help you to solve those problems. You have to be part of it. You can't just test God and hope that God will solve all your problems for you. You have to be part of it. You have to be part of God's solution. Those are three really big lessons in that story. And here we thought it was just a story about spending time in the wilderness and being hungry and alone. But we learn through a parable the truth about how relationships are so important, and looking after others is more important than looking after just our own needs. And 3, we have to be part of the solution of any problem that we are part of. To allow God to do God's work, we need to do our work too. So as we head into this Lent time, this time that we're trying to spend a little bit more focus on practices that help us to be our best selves and to be more closely connected to God, I thought this week we would create some prayer beads. Now, prayer beads are really interesting because they've been around for a long time. They're like an ancient fidget toy, but a fidget toy that helps the person who's fidgeting to focus on God while they're fidgeting. And what's really interesting is that prayer beads can be found in all different religions. There are prayer beads in Christianity and in Hinduism and in Buddhism and in Islam. Now, there's one exception. There are no prayer bead traditions commonly used in Judaism, but instead, in Judaism, they have something called a tzitzit, which is a knotted rope or a knotted tassel that's attached to a prayer shawl. So the way that prayer beads work is that it's something that you can feel and use and move in your hands. And as you do that, you spend time with God. So let's make our prayer beads, and then I'll show you how we can use them. If you were not able to pick up a kit at the church this week with our prayer bead supplies, what you're going to need are about 7 different beads. I have 6 of different color, and then I have my 7th one that has a different texture. So you want 6 that are similar, but they could be different colors. And you want a 7th bead that might be a different shape or a different size, or it's slightly different than the other ones. And the other thing I've seen used is actually dried pasta. You could use macaronis or any other shaped pasta that has a hole in it that you can string. We then need some kind of string. And I have two options. Today I'm going to use some embroidery thread with my beads because that's going to fit well in the size of my hole. But you can also make a more simple version with a shoelace and stringing the beads on a shoelace. So let's get started making our prayer beads. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a length of my embroidery thread. I'm going to cut it so that when it is folded in two, it comes to about my elbow. And now I'm going to start beading. So I'm going to take the first bead that I have, which is the one that's different than all the others. This one here has a different texture. And I'm going to bead that, put that onto my yarn. Okay, once I have my first bead on, I'm going to bring that bead to the very middle of my string. Right there, that's the middle. And I'm going to tie it there. So I'm going to tie a knot. So this bead is not going to move. There it is. So that's my first bead. That marks the middle of my string. It's tied in place and it's not going to move. Now I'm going to add my next bead. So I'm going to string it from one end with one end of the string, like that. Now I'm going to take the other end of my string and I'm going to make it go the opposite way through the bead. So my two ends of my string, one goes in one side of the bead, the other goes in the other side of the bead, and then I can pull it tight with both ends. And pull both ends tight. There we go. And that should bring my bead to that knot that was holding the first bead in place. So you can see both go in each end and come out the opposite end. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the next one. And as we go, it's going to begin to look a little bit, sometimes wetting the edge of the string. If you don't have a needle, that helps. It's going to start to look a little bit like a ladder. And then I have my two ends and I'm going to pull those tight. And that's going to bring the next bead down to the first. So now you can see how it's beginning to look a little bit like a ladder. The beads are the rungs on the ladder. Okay, I'm going to add the rest of my beads in the same way. Okay, I'm finishing up my last bead. There's my purple one. So now I have the first special one that's knotted in place, the next 6 that make a ladder up the string, and now I'm going to put the string together, and I'm going to leave maybe the length of my thumb, and I'm going to tie another knot on the other end so that my beads don't fall off. So here is my prayer beads. Now what's really neat about these two types of prayer beads, either one, is that you can still move the beads with your fingers. So moving the beads kind of helps us with that fidgety feeling type experience, which is really neat. So prayer beads can be used in all kinds of different ways. But here's the way that I would invite you to think about your prayer beads. Each one of these beads, we're going to remember and think about and talk about something specific with God. So on our first bead, let's tell God what we're thinking about and what we're feeling right now. And on our second bead, let's share with God something that was good or beautiful that we noticed today. And on our third bead, maybe we can share something that we're feeling sad or mad or afraid about right now. And on our next bead, maybe we can share something that we're not feeling glad about that we did. Maybe something that we can do better next time. And on our next bead, something that we're thankful for. Let's think about something that we're so grateful for. And then on this bead, we're going to think about somebody else. Something that we hope for or wish for somebody else. And now on our final bead, the bead that never moves, we're going to breathe. Let's take in 2 nice big breaths. And now as we go back the other direction, we're going to listen. And we're going to remember that we are never alone. And that God loves us. And God smiles with us. And God cries with us. And God is always there. Amen. And that's it. That's how easy it is to use your prayer beads. So, I wonder, where will you put your prayer beads so that you have them and you can take that time with God in prayer? Well, my friends, I'm curious about how you might get along with your beads this week. Where will you keep them? Will you put them on your backpack? Will you have them beside your bed? Maybe you could have them at the dinner table and you could share them and do them together. Or maybe you will do them alone and quietly. Well, my friends, until next week, may you have lots of wonderful things to share with God. And may you remember God's presence with you each time you hold on to your beads this week. And so we bless each other into the journey of this week. May you have love in your heart to give. And may you have joy in your heart to share. And may you have strength in your heart to lift others up. Until next week, bye!